I'd have to say what I really enjoy about Happy State Bank is the morale that we have. Part of that goes back to the ownership that we talked about. Everybody understands as an owner, we're going to think like owners and not like managers, and we truly have each other's back each and every day. So that just the teamwork, everyone works so hard for each other, knowing that the ultimate goal is that each one of our customers is going to leave this bank knowing that we have given them everything we have as bankers to exceed any expectations they had out of our bank.
All right.
That's the only time you get those.
That was that sack that was under the counter.
What does that mean?
Mayor, item number 1, approval of the minutes of the last week's meeting. Comments, corrections, deletions, additions, insertions, rotations, permutations. Moving right along to item number 2, ordinance 7401, rezoning over I-40 and Hancock, changing the planned development district to an amended planned development district. Mr. Shaw, take us through it.
Sure. This is a planned development amendment being requested. This is one of the planned developments that, even though this isn't a large site by any means, this is probably one of the areas where this is a good spot for a planned development. This should be what the planned development is used for. The original planned development was approved back in 1983 to try to find a way to get a strip of land developed that had been kind of carved out of an original block that was platted way back when I-40 went through. It split this block up, and so there was a small strip of lots that were then replatted, and so it's just in an attempt to get that developed. And the original plan development was done for professional offices and those types of uses, but with also some added screening and building standards that would apply. This particular request is asking for that original plan development to be amended. And the reason for the amendment is because the original plan development had a building site plan that had parking lot requirements. Oh, that's your phone. Had parking requirements, and this particular development request kind of alters the original building location and parking location. So we felt with this it being directly adjacent to the rock properties to the south, that an amendment was necessary. However, the development standards that are being proposed, if you saw in your staff report, they're either almost exactly the same or just very slightly. Maximum building height, for example, would go from 20 feet to 24 feet. Lot coverage would go from 23% to 28%. There's an increased amount of landscaping. The hours of operation would allow from, instead of 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. to be 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Very strict signage requirements. So everything about this request really maintains the intent of the original plan development. And again, you have a site plan that was included in your packet. And basically what it is, they're taking the parking that was out in the front of the building and they're moving it over to the east side of the building. And actually the building that's being proposed really is a residential design with composition shingles that does fit in with the character of the neighborhood just across the street. Screening requirements are maintained, and everything about it really maintained the intent of the plan development. Planning and zoning commissioners felt that it was appropriate and was a good thing that this would finally close up that section, that strip of land, which ultimately, once this is built, if approved, would help pretty much block the entire strip off and help kind of close that from the light and the noise and the dirt and everything from I-40. So planning and zoning commissioners felt that it was appropriate. We haven't had any negative or positive comments on the request, which is a little unusual since the last time this was done, several of the property owners across the street had comments, but I think that is a sign that they don't have any problems with it. But there was planning and zoning commissioners approved at 5, 4, and 1 abstention. One of the planning and zoning commissioners had an interest in the property, so they abstained.
Any questions?
This is that one right next to the wheat producers. Is that so? Okay. That's good. Yes. That's great.
It'll never be residential.
And that's why the plan development was done in the very beginning, because it never was going to be residential. Nobody really wanted to just let anything happen there. So plan development in this case, I think is proper use.
And just so the folks listening will know, all the residents are notified when this is happening, so it's not like this is going to be a surprise.
Right, there were several that were notified. There was about 7 property owners that received notices, and knowing how these things usually go, I'm sure all of them on that block know what's going on, but haven't received a single comment.
Okay. Moving to the next one, 7402. This is a specific use permit for a carport up in North Institute here. I think we've had a couple in this neighborhood. Okay.
This is a interesting specific use permit application. As you know, the carport specific use permit process was created to give a property owner the ability to seek approval of the placement of a carport when they're not able to meet their front yard setbacks. If you could put up a carport, for instance, if you're in residential 1, which this particular property is, you have a front yard setback of 25 feet from your property line, which means you can't build any structures or place any structures within that first 25 feet from your property line. Probably most of the houses are, if they're not built on that setback, they're built awfully close to it. But a lot of carports you can see going up on the side property where they're still able to meet that setback. But there are some instances where, a lot of the older homes, they're smaller. They've had their garages, their single car garages remodeled to where they have another bedroom. And then there's no garage. And I think back when we set up this process, it was recognized by city commissioners that, your vehicle is a big investment, and there ought to be some way for you to protect that vehicle if it met certain criteria that was appropriate. And that's why this specific use permit process was created. This particular request, the applicant's proposing an 18-foot by 22-foot, so it's a double type carport with room for 2 cars side by side. It's gray and forest green metal. Their house is similar colors, and this carport would be 11 feet from the property line and 24 feet from the back of the curb. This particular house does have a garage. It has a 2-car garage. He just has more vehicles than he has garage space. When staff looks at analyzing these type situations, that's what we take into account. Number one is it really needed? Like I said before, some houses don't have garages. He does. Also, what we look at is the carport going to be the dominant visual feature? Is it going to stick out where that's the thing that you see going down the block? Setbacks are supposed to maintain, the openness, streetscape character, streetscape corridor. And is that going to disrupt that? In this sense, there's one mature tree that's in the yard, but other than that, there's no fences, there's really nothing else, and so you're going to be able to see that carport. A lot of the other ones that have been approved, there's lots of mature trees. A lot of times there are some fences that are in the front. yard, and so it's actually, you won't even see carports until you get right up on them, but this particular area, it has none of that. So staff felt that in this particular case, there really wasn't anything for us to recommend approval of it because it went against all those other criteria that we look at. However, another part of this process and why the reason this process was created is it takes into account the neighborhood, and the input from the neighbors are part of that. And in this instance, this applicant has a signed statement from 7 neighbors, all of the neighbors that are both directly adjacent to his property and in the immediate vicinity. And although there are other carports in the area, we didn't find permits on any of them except one, so that's another issue. But he has the support of almost all of his neighbors that are around his house. And also the street design, he's on a street that has a 90-degree angle, and he's right at the corner. So if you're going to be able to see it, you're only going to be able to see it coming from the east. If you're coming from the north, you're looking directly into his property, and you can't really tell. So planning and zoning commissioners felt that yes, maybe it didn't meet all some of the criteria that we as staff look at as far as, will it disrupt that streetscape character? They felt that the input from the property owners, immediate neighbors, 7 of them, and we also got a phone call from another one who also spoke in favor of it, that was something that they needed to take into account also, and basically if their neighbors didn't mind it, then they felt they were the ones that should have the say in it, so they recommended approval of it unanimously.
This is right in front of the garage doors, is that where it's placed?
It's going to be right in front
It's
of
not
it.
offset.
Right. He was going to attach it, but then he decided to back it off a little bit because that brings in other code issues. So it's officially it's detached, but it's only 2 meters away.
See, I grew up in a household with 5 teenagers at once, all with cars, so I'm feeling his pain. A lot of cars there.
The original case that started this whole thing was in a decent neighborhood, which this is. This is a decent neighborhood.
Yeah.
It is a nice neighborhood.
And a guy wanted to put up a carport, but his neighbors, his yard wasn't all that great anyway, and his neighbors felt that whatever he put up was going to be really junky. And he actually went ahead and built it, and it was pretty junky. And so it was. That's what started this process. That we understand the need for these kind of things, but then there's also if you can meet certain criteria, maybe it is appropriate. But again, part of that process is to listen to the actual neighbors that are in the neighborhood. And that's why the planning and zoning commissioners.
You said every neighbor, so to the east and to the west. I count in the 200-foot area. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. You said, how far out do we go when we're saying everyone?
If you could, yes. This wasn't in the packet, but this is a sketch that we showed where other carports in the neighborhood are shown. It does show the one that actually received a specific use permit and was permitted. And then the area that's shaded in blue right around the property, those are the neighbors that signed their statement saying that they didn't mind the car.
And across the street is our park and then the reservoir, so it's not going to matter there in the future.
Right.
It's sort of close.
And no access to that from that neighborhood that's coming out.
So let me ask you a question. If your neighbor came to you and asked you if you wanted a carport, would you tell him no?
I would.
Oh, I know you would. That's why I didn't ask you the
You
question.
don't allow
That's why I asked Commissioner Steve.
Well, I happen to have a carpet in the back of my house.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would allow it.
Would you be honest with your neighbor if you did? Like you probably would. I think a lot of people when a neighbor asks don't want to say.
Don't want to say no.
Don't want to say.
I get your point, but my neighbors always tell me what they think.
Well.
It hurts.
Yeah, but that's because you're a community organization.
I've been kicked out of really good homes.
Okay, I just think sometimes you've got to look at those kind of endorsements with some questions.
The fact that there's 7 helps with that.
Just to let you know, I think that's a good point. When we were talking to the applicant, because we were telling him when he was talking to us about making the application, we said these are the things that what we looked at, this is the intent, and the hard and fast criteria, we went down the list and he met it, can't be more than 400 square feet, has to be open on 3 sides, can't be any higher than 12, all those kinds of things he meets. And we started getting into the neighborhood aspect of it. And I said, are there others in the neighborhood? He said, well, yeah, but none really right by me. But and we said, well, a lot of times we look to make sure that the other neighbors, aren't opposed. And he goes, well, I've already talked to him. He'd already talked to his neighbors about it. Or this is what he says. He said, well, what if I got statements that said none of them opposed it, because I've already talked to just about everybody that lives right around me. And so he at least tried to do a little legwork up front, I think, because he knew kind of what he was going to be up against. Because we didn't discourage him from making the application, but we wanted to be realistic with him also, that because we went out and looked at it and we said, we don't see a lot of the things that we typically, when we recommend approval of them, some of the things we look at, we don't see that apply to your property. And he just said, basically, I don't understand that. Nobody else minds it. And we got the signatures to kind of prove it.
Sounds like a good neighbor. Go out and do that.
It was like back in East when he went to
We were concerned, staff was concerned, because we didn't want to recommend, even though he had this, we knew that he had the signed statements and everything, but we couldn't recommend approval of it because in our minds, we would be setting a precedent by saying a lot of the things that we look at don't exist. So that's why our staff recommendation was denial. But again, we, as planning and zoning commissioners, felt pretty strongly about the neighbors' input. So, precedent-wise, if somebody else has 90% of the people that live around them, live around where they live, that don't have a problem with it, that's kind of hard to get sometimes.
I think you made a good use of the power of your office, and it's good to let other people hear it. I think it's a good process.
Okay, good questions. Let's move to item number 4, consent agenda. First item on your consent agenda this week, item A, is purchasing a cutaway van and the body to go on the van. And this is to give the camera capability to your newly created stormwater utility. So I think most, if not all of you all, have seen the remotely operated cameras we use in sewer systems. We have used those in the drainage network, but this will provide a dedicated machine that they can use to work on those, catalog them, try to catch those looming issues before they become a failure, and keep us moving forward with that. Any questions on that one? Item B, roof replacement, hangar 3000. This is at the airport. This is over on the east side of the airport on the old barge ramp. This is the roof that was very severely damaged a year ago in a windstorm. Your city insurance carrier is coming through and is funding all but the $25,000 deductible for the replacement of this roof, and the deductible is being funded by the tenant. We're happy with that one, and it's under budget, so that one came out good. Item C, Texas Traffic Safety Program grant. This is a small grant, $9,000 grant. It does specifically require city commission authorization before we're allowed to submit it. So we're asking you for that. This is the annual Click It or Ticket campaign.
Isn't that a lot less than prior years?
About half of last year's from what I remember.
Is there a reason for that besides the not as much money?
That's the only reason.
The money. Right now, it looks like TxDOT may come out of legislative session with some more money, but I would bet that that's gonna go to capital, which truly is probably where it needs to go first anyway.
I thought maybe so many people were wearing their seatbelts now, they didn't think they had to dispense much money on the enforcement. No.
Nice thought.
It's just, my glasses have full.
Item D, dedications and acceptances, the first one. Second one, pretty standard. Item 3, the stormwater drainage agreement. That is actually what Kelly referenced last week, as we were talking about different planning, zoning, platting, plans, etc., for the new United over on the west side of Swansea. So, again, this one's unusual because you're taking a street that they're going to construct and dedicate, put water in it, and then take the water right back to that private property. So that's what that is. They've been very good to work with us, and we're ready to help keep that going.
Which one are you talking about?
D3.
D3.
D3. There's some drawings. No pictures, there's nothing to,
Yeah, there's nothing to picture of.
Oh, here it
it's
is.
a big piles of dirt. I mean, they're really moving. One labeled Exhibit A is kind of the site that shows you where that Anthony Custer Avenue will be. And then the next one shows you how all that lays out.
These are big things like I saw in Hollywood or whatever. Or we got in trouble standing here?
No,
Okay.
So is this
on farmers.
Santi?
Yeah.
Is this Santi on the left-hand side?
The way that's laid out, Sansi's not on it.
Chauncey did cross the line.
Yeah. That pond's behind it.
Okay.
Supposed to be.
Not this, well,
It's in front of it. Yeah, it is behind it.
Like I state trailer.
Questions on the agenda? Nope. So let's move to the final week of the Kelly Show.
He's been starved for so long.
What?
He's been starved for so
Don't
long.
start. Well, he's gonna go, hopefully after getting your comments today, go be a star with your comp plan implementation committee and the planning and zoning commission. But we're gonna try to wrap up what he's talked to you about with some very specific thoughts and recommendations that if you're in agreement with, we'd like for those two bodies to go back now and lay them out and bring in all the affected parties. Hopefully bring these recommendations or something similar back to you.
Jimmy, sure.
Pardon?
Are those all yours? or-
These are mine.
those are the two.
You have been given copies.
Very small handout
We
today,
need to get that.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
last week.
It's the same one. It's
Oh, it's the
It's
same
part
one.
2B.
Oh, yeah.
To be
2A and
continued.
2B.
Yeah, we have.
I'm remembering now.
To be or not to be.
2A and 2B.
You know, Jim, he has everything in his briefcase.
Right.
That's right. He's got.
Oh, well.
Keep expecting that week to on wheels one of these days.
It's getting heavier. Or I'm getting weaker.
He's got his.
Oh, get these.
Well, today's discussion really, I guess we're going from quantity to quality. I only have one slide for you there, so.
Good copy of this.
That's right.
So you can have it forever.
I really appreciate y'all giving me the time to lead you up to this point. And what I wanted to talk about today is really, last week we talked about a lot of the issues, our current process, and at the end of that discussion, I alluded to next week I would bring you our proposal to hopefully help address some of those issues. And that's what this is. The slide that is on the screen, as well as it's just a copy of what you got in front of you. But you have our current plat approval timeline on the top, and then our proposed plating approval timeline on the bottom of the slide. And it's a little small, so I made you kind of a larger version that's behind the slide so you can look at it. The first thing that I wanted to point out is that we've gone from 3 weeks to barely 7 weeks. And I know right off the top of your head you're thinking, wow, we sure are adding a lot of time. But I wanted to remind you that in our previous discussions that on paper that 3-week process looks great, but in reality it's not a 3-week process. As I told you last Tuesday at our last P&Z meeting, we had 5 new plats submitted, and none of them were ready by the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, 0. So 3 weeks sounds great, but it's rare to ever approve a plat in the 28-day cycle that we have, or the 22-day cycle that we currently have. And again, just a quick refresher, a lot of that has to do with plans that aren't required at the time of the plat submittal. So once we start working on the plats, we sometimes then start working on the plans separately, and drainage plans are required a lot of times, and those aren't even submitted until maybe a week or so after the plat. But the bottom line is there's a lot of reasons that on the back end of this, once the Planning and Zoning Commission denies the plat, because again it has to act within 30 days, once it kind of is acted upon, then that process, since there's no deadline or timeline or anything like that associated with it, that just seems to drag on for weeks and weeks. And I think that's where a lot of the angst from the development community is. That's where it's coming from. It takes a long time to get everything just finally shored up and approved and ready to go. So what we were proposing is a longer process, but as I spoke about last week, I think by requiring more information up front, on the front end, and with deadlines tied to it on the back end, that this process will actually get things rolling and get things approved in a much more timely manner, as well as this new process and some of the things that we're implementing internally is going to hopefully promote and foster better coordination and communication internally with staff, as far as getting comments, getting plans out at the same time, getting comments back at the same time, having a source where all the plans come into one point and comments go back out are distributed from one point, and it cuts down on some of the separate phone calls that are taking place. And so anyway, what we're doing is basically going to just over a 6-week process, and I'd like to just go through it real quick with you. In that, on week one thing, and I'll point these out as we go through, but if you see the bottom on where the notes are, these are the things that we're kind of implementing that are new to the process. The very first one being the very first point in the process is that we're going to require, not recommend, but we're going to require a plat pre-submittal conference. That if you want to make a certain Planning and Zoning Commission date, then we back that up to the 6 weeks, and you schedule a plat pre-submittal conference, and that's where we all meet and you talk with staff about this is what my proposed subdivision is going to be, and then all of the staff are going to be there, and at that point they'll say, okay, well, if that's what you're proposing, here's what we're going to need to approve your plat. And so that first week we meet on that Monday, and according to the people that are our staff, more than likely we'll be able to tell everybody what they're going to need at that meeting. But if we have that week to look at it further, and if something happens to come up, or if there's some questions that maybe didn't get answered in that conference, we still have that week to talk to the developer or whatever and get that cleared up. But by Friday, we should be able to tell them what they're going to need for their plat submittal, whether it's plans or what. And they'll get that from us by that Friday. That next Monday is when we would take their application and plat that's when they submit it for review. And then staff has that week, and this is a new part of this. This week too is what we're calling the application completeness review period, where you submit your plat. We're actually going to have a formal application, which we don't have now, that this is the application, this is the developer's name, this is the plat's name, this is what kind of plat it is, replat, amended plat, what kind of plat it is, how many acres it is, are improvements needed, all those kinds of things. So we're going to have a formal application, and along with that, a fee has to be paid. We've got for instance, we've got a plat that just was approved, and we still haven't had the fee paid on it. So we're trying to get the fee paid. So things that you would think would be normal, we just need to tighten up a little bit. And so this formal application review would be part of that, and that we would then, the planning department would take all those submittals. We then distribute those to all the affected departments, and by that Friday, we have to basically certify that plat has been, it's complete, that application complete. It has all the things that we have asked for in our pre-submittal conference. It has those things, and at the end of week 2, we either say that that application is complete, or if it's not complete, we give it back and we give them a written statement why it's not complete or what else is needed. Now, at that point, do they have to go back and schedule another pre-submittal conference? No, they don't. They've just kind of got themselves off this schedule. They're able to get those things back to us. Basically, everything's working on a 2-week cycle. So they would be able to get that stuff back to us the next review submittal deadline, and so they would then be able to continue on. They don't have to go back and do another pre-submittal conference, but it does kick them off of that schedule. If it is complete, we then in week 3, that's when our formal review begins. We've certified that we've got everything we need. We then begin the formal review process. That 30-day clock starts. And by the way, a lot of cities do it this way. They have a pre-submittal review time because they don't want the clock starting unless they are assured that they have everything that they need. And so this isn't something we just thought of. This is something that's used in
Well,
other
did
cities.
you not also say last week that most cities have this dual plan process?
Most, by far, the majority of cities have a preliminary plat and a final plat process, which is much more time consuming than this is. We're still trying to keep our final plat process, but we're incorporating a few things from the preliminary plat process, like a pre-submittal conference, and just giving us a little bit more time on the front end to look at things instead of just going right to final plat. And we got to make a decision in 22 days.
Can I ask a question before you move on? Just a couple of things. If at the pre-submittal conference you decide that they need a drainage study and they haven't gotten one of those, how long would it take them to get something like that? Doesn't it take weeks and weeks and weeks to get?
It depends. I mean, you can't do it overnight. Well, depending on what it is. I mean, the complexity of the project would depend on how complex the drainage report would be. But again, most of the time in these type deals, they know what they're doing anyway. And if they don't have one already done, they've probably got one almost done. So again, one of the things that we hope is a byproduct of this process is more upfront communication. That if they didn't have time to get it done before this submittal deadline, maybe again, they'll only be thrown off by a couple of weeks if they weren't able to get it done. But maybe next time they could maybe talk with staff a little sooner before that deadline and say, we're thinking about doing this, you think a drainage report's gonna be required? Yeah, it would be.
And if you certify it at the end of that second week, and then later on you were determined that, we need a drainage something or whatever, what then happens? Do they go back? You alluded to that a little bit. Do they have to start over? Do you have exceptions, appeal? How does it work?
Well, number one, I hope that doesn't happen. That's the main thing. I hope that doesn't happen. But if it does happen, it may happen. If it does happen, there are some things in here that we still have some built-in escape valves, basically. That, as you'll see on down in like week 5 and 6, if things aren't ready, number one, you have a 30-day waiver that you can sign that kind of gets us off the state law hook. That, okay, well, it's not going to be ready, and so you're either going to need to sign this, or we're going to have to deny your plat. And if it gets denied, it does have to go back to the. But if you sign this 30-day waiver, we've got 30 more days. And then also, we've got the ability to do that. And then also, we're going to have another way that it's going to be language, something to the effect that, or is otherwise agreed to by the city. You know, for some really unusual thing to happen, we'll go ahead and allow this to continue.
Let me give a real world example of what Brian's talking about. It came in my head when he was asking about that. Behind Quail Creek, where that development is now, and we had at the last moment drainage problems that really were voiced by the community below it. Would this preclude something like that, or give that voice early enough that it would allow the developer to adapt to that community below it, or adjust it? Would this solve that in your mind?
Like where the Citadel is and
Right.
what their questions were?
Right.
Between the rim and the Citadel.
Yeah.
Right. That particular one came up on a drainage plan, but again, the plat was submitted before the drainage plan was submitted. This would require all that to be up front, so it would have helped that situation. But did that situation get resolved? He probably wouldn't have gone to the step where we start the 30-day clock, because that drainage report, we would have had it, and those discussions take place, and we would try to get those things worked out before we would start the clock on the official review. And like I say, there's a 2-week, every 2 weeks there's a deadline coming around. So he could, whichever one, once we worked it out with those residents, the next one that was coming along, we would put it on that.
So you would query the residents as part of your process if it was needed? Or is it done through engineering and you don't really
I
query?
think of it as this way, Mayor. Under our current system, the good intention is just to hurry and get a plat done to your co-developer. And so we hurried at the front, but there are required things that have to be done, and then it gets stalled, and you have all this having to stall it and get things done. Kelly's plan wisely flips it over, and you do all the studies up front, and then when you're ready to go, you move rapidly to the end of it.
Everybody knows what to expect.
Exactly, and so staff is able to do their analysis, say, well, there's a drainage issue here, we've gone out and looked, or we've heard from people. All of that happens early in the process, and when you're, rather than a rush at the end.
And we're getting a chance to see it all at once. That's a key
And
thing.
that is the big thing, that we're able to see everything at the same time and know how it all is supposed to work together. Where right now, the process is, we're approving a plat that we may not know exactly how it all is supposed to work.
I was surprised when I came to a larger city and found that you had this system. This is an unusual system across the state.
Well, I know it's going to be a huge learning curve. How are you going to get the word out to the developers so that you can have like a class 101 to tell them what the new plans are going to be, instead of when they wait to come in to do that, and all of a sudden they're shocked.
I would think we'd have Louis tell them.
I think you are.
Well,
Motion and second.
I've been in contact with the big developers. We've also had, and so we've talked about kind of the process that we're going through already.
Okay.
If we get the nod here, we would like to kind of start the formal process of taking this through the channels that it needs to go through, and as part of that is going back to the development community and saying, okay, this is the process that we're really going, heading towards. And even though we've kind of talked about it before, this is it, and we really need to know or I would really like to know if you're on board, and if you're not on board, why, and let's talk about it. But they hopefully, by the time, if this gets approved, they will already be very aware of it. And so, and there's still going to be, once it gets implemented, then we're going to go through those kind of growing pains. But
The one part that I don't quite understand though is the notification. The citizens below that got excited, like,
right.
maybe because of the way the system was set up. That also sort of happened in economies. Are there things in here that notify the community early if it's necessary?
Plants don't get noticed there. A zoning case gets there. It gets noticed.
And that's what I was going to
Plants
say.
don't receive notice.
There are certain plants
You
that
don't.
require notification, but the kind of plants that we're really talking about do not. What we would try to do is we've got a very competent engineer that once we get everything where we can look at everything together and see how everything is supposed to work, then our engineering department is going to be the one that raises those flags that say, well, we've got a community that's adjacent to this property. We need to be very confident on how you're going to drain that. Now, do we go and notify those people? We don't have a requirement to notify, but that's just one of those things that maybe it's incumbent on staff to think about those kinds of things. And well, maybe we ought to contact that homeowners association and see if they've got some issues or something like that.
That's how it was raised in the one that you're talking
Right.
about.
But we have no actual requirements to notify.
Okay.
So there was actually a formal process on that one.
Sounds good to me.
Kelly, you covered, we've got one point on here on the bottom of his notes, note number 4, that really want to set up on the table and be sure that y'all are comfortable with, and then let's kind of walk it forward. The developer agreement, some form of a certainty or a surety for those public improvements that the plats are designed to trigger, those streets, those water, wastewater, storm sewer, etc.
Right, and you can read. It's just really review periods, and then we send back comment sheets. That week 4, 3, 4, and 5. One of the major issues that, and I'd already mentioned the 30-day waiver. There's 2 areas in the process where if they can't get their approval, if they can't get the revised plats back to us in time, they can sign that 30-day waiver process and allow them to go on to the next agenda. If we get down to the end of the process and there's something that has come up that we just don't seem to have been able to work out in this time frame, 30-day waiver requirement before the P&Z, and it can also be carried over. So there's a couple of ways that you can be extended on without having to be denied, but we're going to cap that at 2 P&Z meetings, which would be 60 days. Or as otherwise agreed. So there's their escape valves. But at the very end, in that week 7, I did want to point this out because this is a key component, and this is a new component. At the P&Z meeting, the Planning and Zoning Commission could approve the plat. They can approve it, but we won't actually file the plat until we've got some type of a developer agreement done on how the public, if needed, how the public improvements are going to be done.
Like a performance bond.
And that's something that we're still going to work with. I want to work closely with Marcus's office, but what type of developer agreement that is still kind of up for debate. It could be and if public improvements are needed, it could be a cash escrow, it could be a surety bond, a performance bond,
LLC,
yeah, a letter of credit.
From the bank or something.
Yeah, from the bank. There's been some discussion about especially smaller type developments that might need small improvements, maybe some sort of a covenant that says I don't have to put anything up right now, but I know I have this responsibility to pay for this improvement at such time the city deems it's necessary, and that's tied with the land. It runs with the land. So if the property owner who signs it sells the property, and then says, well, yeah, I made that agreement, but I don't own the property anymore, so, which has happened, you know, so.
Can you describe the improvements maybe? I mean, not all of them, but like some.
Streets,
Mhm.
streets,
Curbs,
water,
curbsides.
sewer main extensions,
Okay.
you know, something like that.
This is always confusing to me when you say the public improvement. You're just talking about within the boundaries of the subdivision, not outside.
Well, 99% yes. But you do require an adjacent property owner that has frontage on an arterial to pay a small piece into the construction of that arterial. Beyond that, yes, one exception could be off-site drainage, but that's more of an outlier. The concept, and Kelly's right, he and Marcus, the development community, these two committees have got a lot of work to do to narrow it down. He's talked to developers about this. I've talked to developers about this. I haven't talked to all of them. I think on a conceptual level, we all kind of agree. Remember that Amarillo allows you to start selling lots and receiving building permits as soon as a plat is done. We want to continue to accommodate that. That's how that developer really goes into an accelerated phase from a blank piece of land, a blank piece of paper, to now there's homes going up, and there's streets being built, and there's water lines being put in. The concept is to have a surety, and it's not that we're concerned they won't get done, it's we want to be certain that those improvements are done properly in a timely manner, because you're rapidly heading to the point that a home's going to be finished. When somebody wants to close their financing, they want to move in, and we've got to be certain that those public improvements serving that are in and done and accepted.
By contrast, the city I came from would not issue a building permit for any houses
Until that's finished.
well, until you had the fire hydrants installed. Dirt streets cut in, water lines in, fire hydrants in place. Now we'll let you start putting wood up. It's a
So
different
no building
approach.
permit. No
We're-
building
Again,
permit.
we're very liberal here, trying to expedite, not liberal, but trying to expedite that construction. And that's all good, as long as everybody plays nicely. But as soon as you have a problem, and you've got people with a moving van trying to get in their house, and there's still no paved road, or there's not fire hydrants working, and street lights aren't in yet, now they start calling city hall saying, what kind of neighborhood is this?
And
They
what
should.
And what has happened in the past is rather than having to put up a surety bond, they start selling those lots, they get some cash flow going.
Yeah.
And that's how they assure that they're going to be able to pay for those.
That's
Public
that's the other side of the coin.
That's why that's how they make it work. They could do it a different way, but this way works now, and it's a little bit more
So-
palatable for
So
them.
this hopefully solves both sides. We've got assurances. They can go ahead and sell a lot, but we got them on the hook some way with this agreement with a bond or a letter of credit or something, if they take that
They
money and do
fail.
something else.
So they still potentially have their cash flow. They just got the surety.
This
bond.
allows them to continue to generate that cash flow. It gives us the
But it gives us
certainty.
protection.
We can address
Since the day your house is finished and you went to close your financing, and we looked up and said, but sir, ma'am, the water line serving that house has not been accepted. It hadn't been tested. So we need you to not close on that house for some period, 72 hours. Purely hypothetical, but things like that can occur.
Things like that do occur, and like I was telling you last week, I look at it as a train, that you've got the building permit issued, you've got things going out there, and at this point, you've got lenders, you've got a property owner, and you've got the builder. Everybody's wanting things done, and all of a sudden, everything screeches to a halt because it's the city's fault that we haven't, we're holding the CO because you
Certificate
haven't,
of occupancy.
you haven't done X. And at that point, it's awfully hard to do that when it puts an extreme amount of pressure on staff. When you're the one that's holding this whole thing up, and you're costing me a sell on a house. And that CO just isn't, I don't think it's the proper tool to use as a hammer to get things done.
It's not, because you're taking that private party that bought a lot, contracted a builder, arranged their financing,
and you're using them then to say, well, that's great, that's a beautiful home, but I really can't let you move in because somebody else didn't finish what they needed to get at.
We could have addressed months before.
Which
that.
this provides a better
Well,
tool.
but then when you get to that point, how is it that you then, what's the mechanics of how then you access this? Do you say to said developer, either you get this part of the job done today, or we're going to tap into this and we're going to call an extra contractor?
That's the concept.
That's how it
Will
works.
there be lead time to do that? Will there be enough lead time where you don't stop a homeowner from moving in and you get this thing fixed?
Well,
Usually, if you're gonna call one of these, however we do it, you know, if you're gonna call into these one of these surety elements, that's serious stuff, and it would be rare that that actually would have to occur, because if that does occur, puts a real black eye on the developer.
usually, in my experience, a letter to the developer CCing their bond company is all it takes. It doesn't go any further than that. The bond company calls him up and says, what are you doing? He says, I'm on it.
That was taken care of yesterday.
They'll never get another
But
bond.
remember that this is caused.
Now, I've had some go all the way, but most of the time, just the letter
I
is all it
see.
takes.
I see.
So if they're in default or something, then you're going to do that. But are we delaying that homeowner? Because to me, that's the person we need to protect in this body.
Well, we have to protect the whole neighborhood. I can't accommodate a single homeowner who's rushing their closing. As the city, we have to look at the entire neighborhood and think about the 200 homes coming.
We can protect them if we're ahead of it.
Well,
We
yes.
can protect
And
them
this
if we
gives us
set
that
the
opportunity.
process up, and that's what should happen. We should never put the homeowner in a position to be the pawn in this.
I would agree with that,
But
certainly.
if we're gonna issue building permits, we're creating the possibility of that situation.
Anything we do, I hope we protect that so the homeowner isn't left out there.
Well, today, we have no means to protect that homeowner. This is, I think, a pretty big step towards it. Is it gonna grab it each and every time? I don't think so, but you're making an agreement that has teeth in it on the front side, and when we just, that doesn't exist today. The potential for the conflict exists because we allow the early sale of those lots, and not the sale of the lots, but the issuance of the building permit. That's what creates the potential. And this is adding something now on that city side that protects the public side of the ledger to try to ensure that all this comes together at the same time.
You
Most
talk to
cases it
developers,
does.
this ensures the developer can move ahead too. He knows the program ahead of time, there's no surprises for him. If the surprise is there, it's because of some unusual engineering or geographic thing, and you can fix that. But they know it ahead of time. It helps both sides.
Agreed. And because you've looked at things early on in the process and you looked at them simultaneously, most of those developers will be ready to go to contracting by the time they get their plat filed. So while it appears as though it's a longer process up front, and it is, you're actually cutting a lot of this. Okay, now that works, so let me see the next piece. Okay, now you're pulling that together. I think it's got a chance to
You
be
know,
positive.
I always like to have my cake and eat it too. You know, I always really like that. And so, you know, I can see right now in this conversation how this is going to go and where the points are going to be. You know, because while on the one hand, it's exactly as you've described, as soon as you implement this policy, developers are going to say, well, we didn't used to have to provide all this stuff ahead of time. We didn't need this. This is what we're doing for 45 years. And that's going to be a problem.
The ones that we talked, yeah, but we've been around visiting, I mean, different commissioners visited, and you have too. The developer I'm hearing from want this kind of process, wouldn't you
So
agree,
they know.
Kelly? So they know what the even playing field, they know where they begin, where they end.
The ones that I've talked to, they are much better amenable to something like this than the way it's working now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
and-
this
and-
just puts some kind of certainty to it.
Yep.
And when we brought up the point about a performance bond or something like that, you know, kind of got some mixed reviews on that, but if that's the way it had to be, then that's fine. I even had one comment that said, well, that's, you know, if you can't, it may cost a little bit more up front, but if you can't do that, then you shouldn't be in the development business in the first
That's right.
place.
That's what almost all of them told us. One said this is the easiest city in the world to get started building.
Well, but in the world, the street is, it's the toughest and the most time consuming. And it's so screwed up, but they get no cooperation
I
from
don't
City
hear
Hall.
that anymore.
Well, we shouldn't.
I don't
It's
hear
funny,
that
it's
anymore.
funny to me that we require this in what's constructed before a plat's even approved. So why wouldn't we use that same thought inside the city?
That's crazy.
It's that-
That's-
Well, yeah, so.
You
They'll
go for
protect
it,
you outside
Kelly.
the city, but not in the city.
And one other concern is, you feel pretty comfortable that this doesn't unfairly favor the large developers with more resources. You feel it's something, see, because I don't know business, it's something that big as well as medium and small could be able to accommodate.
There's no doubt that there's a requirement more up on the front. The improvements that are going to be needed, I think, are going to be required from anybody. If improvements are needed, improvements are needed. And you're going to need to do them properly. And so this process is incorporated to make sure that happens, and I think that's fair to everybody, including property owners that are going to be buying properties in these areas. And there are a lot of cities that incorporate waivers into this process. That if the city finds that it doesn't create any undue hardship or something, there's maybe you have a waiver process that waives that requirement for this particular development because of some circumstance. But I think the more uniformly it's applied, the better.
Well, I think, and it's an excellent question, and you asked one similar last week, and I've been thinking about it. The surety provided back to the, that is an added cost, no question. We don't do that today, it's never required, so that is an added cost that'll come in, and it's going to apply whether it's a $100,000 contract or $10 million, it's coming. So that is an additional potential expense they're looking at. What I think would be the real impact, especially to the smaller developer or development, isn't that it ultimately costs them more to do the plat, to do the plan, to get the approval, to sell the lots. It's just that they're going to have to do it up front all at once, rather than doing it, okay, my plat's done, now let me design the public improvements. Okay, I think, that's probably the real impact that we're going to see.
It's changing behaviors.
But you can show us, you have shown us a couple of communities that have suffered because we didn't do this. And they're in difficulty now because we didn't do this.
There are two things off the top of my head that we've already talked about that would prevent the type of situation that currently exists in the area east of Eastern, and then a property north of I-40 east or west of Whitaker. The property's platted.
Utilities are in?
Well, actually, the one that's east of Eastern, there's nothing. It was just platted, and it's just dirt.
Sinclair.
Yeah, Sinclair. It's just dirt, nothing's in, and now it's really hard to get anything happening there. But there's another one over kind of by the Eastridge area where the subdivision has been partially developed. There's a large section, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 lots, where utilities are in, but that's all. Lots are platted, no roads, no alleys, and they're gone.
One other question then.
That wouldn't happen with this.
Would we have the ability with a process like this, for example, to be able to say, okay, if this meets the qualifications of an infill project, we'll waive your surety? So that we could incentivize infill, not to the disadvantage of big developers, but to the advantage to encourage infill.
I'd like to take a different advice because I think the surety bond ensures, especially in a smaller development, that the homeowner is ultimately protected, that it moves along. I'd rather use a different device to accomplish the same thing. I don't know what that is, but I hate to make a standard for this.
Okay.
You can get stung by no performance
Okay.
bond pretty easy.
Does anybody, though, in this process feel like that it's valuable to do something
I
to
agree.
incentivize
A
infill.
different kind of incentive.
But I'm,
But not on a surety bond.
How about a direct incentive to the person investing in the deal? I mean, I think there could be other things.
Do you have to go through the same process to infill, because isn't it already platted?
Right.
A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, a true infill project will be platted and will at least have reasonable access to utilities. They may not be exactly where they want, so I think I would have to ask that if we're gonna go down the road of having one of these sureties, that let's require that on all of them. But I do think, and Marcus has done some research, we haven't brought it back to you, but we've got some research on how to incentivize the infill. One of the most common and simple ways to do it is just waiver of certain fees. You're on a small scale, but you're starting to buy down what ultimately is gonna be that per square foot cost of a new home. And I think we can do that, we can consider that outside of this particular, we're really in the nuts and bolts of, we're gonna take a piece of dirt and turn it into a new piece of our community. Whereas the infill, let's work with what's here, and let's find a way to make it work for you to cause that home to go there.
Yeah, I thought it was apples and oranges.
Not just infill, but revitalization. So I think there should be something that is significant, and maybe even more than peace, because we're not just talking about one lot in the middle of a bad place. That's not gonna get fixed unless we incentivize creating a new atmosphere in that place.
Okay, well, good. I'm just glad to hear that the commission say that they feel like there's some
Well,
special
yeah.
incentives and value.
Here's an
to
example,
that.
over on Emerald Boulevard where that hotel is, I think there's 5 units open across the street next to Baptist, and there's all kinds of places like that the whole area needs some improvement.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry I didn't go off on a rabbit trail, but I thought I'm looking for every place I can to.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I've got some ideas on it.
Great. That's,
Yeah.
We'd
I
all
think
I
the
love
last
that
list
stuff.
is
I
about
love
2.5 pages.
One bite at a
We'll kind of
time.
whittle them out.
that's correct.
Yeah, we don't want
I'm
that.
so glad to know you've got done that before.
These guys,
Yeah.
I just thought it.
So
Volunteers.
could I take that as a thumbs up to
Yeah.
move forward? Or?
Well, it's not a vote, but it's a consensus.
Okay.
Thank you for all the work.
What he said.
That's a good
No
plan.
problem.
Whatever.
He's gone for a month and comes back to.
Anything to run.
Yeah, really.
We're encouraged to hear your next steps, Kelly.
Well, we really want to take this through a very inclusive and extensive process. And it may come back identical, there may be some tweaks, but kind of like was done with the recent adoption of the building codes, when it gets back to you guys for action, you'll know that it's been heard.
And that was the point of this whole thing. We now starts the formal process of really, getting all of the input and getting all the ducks in a row. But we just always want to keep you up to date and informed on kind of what's going on.
Well, and also, and I know you're going to, but those that are going to be affected by this, the developers, that they understand. They may not like every job and tittle of it, but they understand why it's being put together this way.
We'll make certain of that for sure.
They all want something like this if you really sit down and talk to them.
Certainty is better than uncertainty.
Paying the application fee is part of the completeness.
Yeah, but unusual, but yeah, we're going to require that.
That's it.
Very good.
Okay, any final questions on the development process? You will get to see it all again, it's just a matter of when.
What's that word you said? What was that?
John.
I think that's drop the I and cross the T.
Is that what that is?
I think that's-
I don't understand that. Is that in New Mexico?
Well, you're young,
In review?
and I mean, you think.
Mayor, if we could, we'd like to call a closed session.
Sounds good.
All right. We won't have to bring you back for various.
The Mayor Commissioner call a closed session pursuant to the following exceptions to Texas Open Meetings Act.